All right, I'm here with Joanne Beach, Director of Alliance, Justice and Compassion. Joanne, thanks for coming to the podcast.
Oh, Greg, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, we are looking forward to your ministry to us from the pulpit this weekend. But over the next few minutes, Joanne, could you just unpack for us a little bit of what the Justice and Compassion Division of the Christian Missionary Alliance in Canada looks like, both here in Canada and to places around the world? What is the purpose of the Justice and Compassion Division?
Well, to sum it up, I guess the Alliance Justice and Compassion exists to facilitate justice and compassion ministries of the Christian and Missionary Alliance in Canada. We help to resource, network, and promote the local, national, and international ministries that seek to bring wholeness and well-being to people made vulnerable by circumstances of poverty, disaster, and injustice.
Wow. We've had a few guests in the past here on the podcast to do with justice and compassion ministries around the world. Eye-opening, tough stuff, heart-wrenching stuff at times.
Very much so.
Yeah, and the C&MA has had a long history with what I would call world missions, cross-cultural missions, sending the traditional model of sending international workers to foreign fields.
Over 130 years.
Yeah, that's an incredible, rich tradition. And part of an international worker's work in those fields has to do with gospel ministry, evangelism, caring for the poor and needy, and justice and compassion. And so it's been a long part of our history, but this particular department is relatively new, I would say.
11 years, we just crossed the 11-year threshold. I would say we do have that in our DNA and in our history, but like many other evangelical denominations, I think with the liberal, slippery slope of the social gospel, let's say, as many churches left sort of the proclamation part of the work of the gospel. I think evangelical denominations, including the C&MA, began to elevate the priority of evangelism and discipleship. And that was our big purpose of being overseas. And perhaps in some ways we lost some of that value of a more holistic mission.
Right. So how did this come about? What was the impetus that really brought this focus to being more intentional about justice and compassion within our broader ministry?
Right. During Franklin Pyle's, our former president's reign, you want to say, during his leadership, he really felt that we needed to re-embrace our history, our more full expression of the gospel. And we held a think tank at our Toronto Alliance Church, was right downtown Toronto, Street Mission. A number of people were invited from other agencies, our partner agency with the Alliance US, C&MA. We had, I was a district mission consultant at the time in the Eastern Central Canadian District. And so I was invited to be a part of that. I was, for 3 days, I believe it was, we talked about what is the gospel and a more full holistic gospel. Many evangelical organizations have started an arm of relief and development and registered as a separate charity.
Okay.
And after the 3 days of deliberating, we really felt, no, we want to keep this together as a holistic mission. So it turned out I was hired as the first director in this office 11 years ago. It was an office of the Global Ministries Department at first.
Okay.
And I basically was to facilitate, raise money, help learn best practice in terms of a Christian development or Christian holistic work. And so it was really mostly focused at the beginning on raising funds, because as you know, our Global Ministry Fund funds our workers to be there, but the actual work designated funds raise money for the holistic work that we do. So that was a big part of the beginning. And not too long after that, Franklin Pyles in his vision said, this isn't just for overseas. We want to be this in Canada. And so he yanked me out of GM, Global Ministries, and I was a direct report to him for the rest of his tenure. And we began to exist to try and work with our Canadian church. And of course, Defend Dignity was part of that. It has a separate director, but we just began to really think through what does a holistic mission, integral mission look like here in Canada as well as overseas.
Yeah, and there's a lot. You and I were just chatting ahead of the podcast recording here, and you were just kind of outlining some of the things that are a part of your portfolio or a part of the Justice and Compassion arm, from supporting churches with understanding refugee and how to become more aware of the refugee crisis and how they can also be involved in supporting refugees. You talked about some of the truth and reconciliation, challenging churches to have discussions with Indigenous peoples to learn. Tell me a little bit about again, some of the parts of your
Yeah,
portfolio.
the portfolio, the office, or the Department of Justice and Compassion has really broadened over the 11 years. We've added things like the chaplains ministry. There's a network of 123 chaplains across Canada that fall under sort of that justice and compassion work. They're on the front lines in places where maybe pastors and churches can't go here in Canada, working with vulnerable people and doing spiritual care. And so that network falls under our portfolio. We have a national team that and a coordinator that reports to me. Disabilities ministries. We offer resources to churches on disabilities ministries. Parish nurses. There's a small network of parish nurses as well that serve churches through church ministries in communities across Canada as well.
Yeah.
And the list could go on.
Well, you and I chatted a little bit about the disaster relief. Again, when we see these tragedies happening around the world, what is the Alliance's response? How do we as a denomination step into that, and what's the process there?
Well, whenever there is a major disaster that's media driven, I always get phone calls. Are we raising money for that? Can we donate to the Alliance? And of course, the answer is always yes. We have established a global emergency response fund. It's a generic account, but if there is a government matching program announced, we have to set up a separate disaster specific account. And so we have the Global Emergency Response Fund, but also for like Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines or Nepal earthquake, Haiti earthquake, when the government had announced a matching program to individual donations, we've set up those accounts and then use that to respond. We don't send a relief team and set up a compound as other organizations do. Our value is to always try to work through the local church. But we always ask the question, do we have international work there? Do we have international workers on the ground who are working with a church or a church NGO within the country? We also ask, do we have a relationship with a Christian NGO in that country already? And then the answer in some of the cases is yes. Or are there international NGOs, non-government organizations that that are like-minded that we can partner with? And the answer is always yes. And so you can always respond through the Global Emergency Response Fund, and we can always find a way to move that money through like-minded organizations.
Yeah. I think that's really cool that, again, you're working with the people that are already there, that have a relationship in the community or in that area, and supporting them.
In Southeast Asia, in a small country, we have workers on the ground there who had been trying to get into a particular area of the country where they work because they're focused on trafficking, and that particular area is known for trafficking a lot of young girls. And always the door was closed. And then recently there's a major dam that broke, wiped out the villages in that region, and all of a sudden our workers were invited in.
Oh, wow.
And so they obviously worked with other local Christians, went in to respond. And so it was a smaller response. It was maybe around $10,000 at first. And of course we don't have to appeal to the Mass Canadian Alliance Church. We have the funds there in the Global Emergency Response Fund. And there are countless numbers of scenarios like that where we've been able to respond.
When Justice and Compassion goes into some of these more difficult areas, where do you begin? Like, how do you begin to determine how we meet that need as a denomination?
Yeah. In this role, in the last 11 years, I've been to over 55 countries, and I've seen a lot of great heartache. I've been in disaster zones, like earthquake zones that look like it's surreal. It's like a Hollywood set, and you sit with people who've experienced the tragedy of loss, not only of stuff, their homes, but loved ones. I remember sitting in Mafraq, Jordan, with Syrian refugees Mafraq is like 7 kilometers or so from the Syrian border. And I could hear bombs going off when we were there. And sitting with these, beautiful people who'd lost everything, just fled the country with what they could carry. And, they were asking the question, and this is sometimes some of the ways that you get over the horror of it, of their experience, is when they share things with you like that. Why are the Christians helping us? He said. I'll never forget that. And I think I told that story on Sunday at your service. But, just to see that the church is the face and the hands and the feet of Jesus, and people are responding to that. And when Justice and Compassion, the Canadian Alliance churches, either through their financial support or prayers, can be a part of seeing people's lives touched and healed and brought to wholeness and new hope restored, that's a beautiful thing that the Canadian church can be a part of.
Absolutely. Now, does the Justice and Compassion arm, do you work with forms of levels of government, both here in Canada to meet some of these needs, and internationally with other law enforcement at all,
Sure.
or
Well,
government
of course,
agencies?
Defend Dignity has a long-standing work with government and, of course, local police forces and various services. And that's, of course, Defend Dignity is directed by Glendine Girard and her amazing team. And so they're like a parallel, like they are Justice and Compassion Ministry of the Alliance,
Right.
but they are parallel. So Glendine and I have our offices beside each other, but we give leadership separately to the various initiatives. But in terms of my connection with government, I would say that the key place that I sit on the Canadian Council of Churches for the Commission of Justice and Peace. Okay. And a lot of times we meet with government. Example, most recently on the Canadian government's initiative to eradicate poverty in Canada. And so the Commission on Justice and Peace was able, as the Canadian churches, sit down with the government and talk about how can the Canadian church be a part of your strategy. And the government said to us, well, we recognize that you have a presence in every community across this country. And so, yes, you will be a significant part of the solution. And so to have conversations like that is awesome. I also sit on the board and also program Alliance. The Alliance is a member of the Canadian Food Grains Bank.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And of course, we have a long-standing relationship with Global Affairs. The Canadian Food Grains Bank is a collaboration or consortium of 15 Christian church members, from the Catholics to the Pentecostals and everything in between. Yeah. We make up and we work together on ending global hunger. And the Canadian government, CFGB personnel, on behalf of its members, they negotiate a deal for $25 million a year. Global Affairs gives us money to do food assistance and agricultural and livelihood programming, nutrition programming overseas. Wow. And the Alliance has an account there. So as I said, I sit on that board. And so I've had lots of opportunity to interact with government, telling the stories of local churches, local Christian organizations that we partner with internationally are doing amazing work at agricultural, at food assistance, at meeting people's needs who fled war or who are experiencing changing climates. And so they have to grow food differently because they don't get the spring rains anymore. They get either massive monsoon and then drought, And so how do you train someone? We use conservation agriculture. But so through the Canadian Food Grains Bank, we've had many times to sit with the Canadian government and talk about the stories. Different MPs have traveled to some of these places. Most of our Alliance funds we program in Niger through our partner, their implementing partner, Samaritan's Purse Niger. Okay. And so we've programmed probably over $2 million there over the last 10 years in agricultural programming and food assistance. Our own team has also done work through the Canadian Food Grains through our account and matching dollars again through the Food Grains Bank. And right now we're actually preparing a food assistance program in the Arabian Peninsula for a food assistance response to a country there that's been in war for the last 3 years. Wow. So, and that's going to be matched with Canadian government money. So
incredible.
Yeah.
So encouraging to know that the Alliance is stepping into some of these really tough things, to have a presence, to respond to God's call on our denomination. But what would you say right now would be maybe the greatest challenge facing our Justice and Compassion ministry as a denomination? And then what's something you're really excited about of what's coming?
I think in many of our churches, we're still our best kept secret. When I do visit churches and preach or teach in churches or just present the Alliance Justice and Compassion, even with our gift catalog that we put out every year, I still get phone calls from people saying, well, that's great, we're raising this money, but who's actually doing the work? And I'm like, our international workers, this is us, This is us doing this work. And so when I do have the opportunity to share all of this and even more that we don't touch on today, they're going, what? The Canadian Alliance is doing this? We're involved in this? This is amazing. And so, thanks for helping to get the word out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's probably one of the challenges. And then some of the areas of a more holistic gospel. Some people want to challenge that and push, it's one thing to fill an empty stomach, but what about their soul? I'll hear stuff like that. Okay. Or, it's more important that their soul is saved to go to heaven. And so one of the biggest things I'm working on right now is just talking about teaching from Scripture a more holistic gospel. And truly, what is God wanting to reconcile through Christ's work? And, what is what are the multi-levels of the gospel that Jesus is bringing healing and restoration to? And so that's another big initiative right now that I'm working on is an understanding, a reframing of our doctrine of creation. And some people just say, climate change, that's the liberal slope of, environmentalism.
Right.
And it's not. When you really study the scriptures and understand Christ, the creator, sustainer, and reconciler of all things, the mandate from the garden to steward creation, that mankind was given that unique role, that was damaged with original sin. But it's amazing how the church needs to understand that stewarding creation is about bringing wholeness and well-being to communities who are suffering because the land suffers, because of the lack of water, lack of being able to grow their food, the lack of, there are environmental issues that the church should speak up about.
Right.
And so that's another challenge, I think, when we begin to talk about things. Some pastors are going, yes, this is about time the church is speaking up and talking about this. And other churches are going, oh, here's another issue that, we're going down that slippery slope of liberalism. And so every time I teach on we go to the scriptures, we re-examine those scriptures that talk about this and challenge us as an evangelical movement. Where did we go off the rails on this? And so, so that's another challenge, but it's a joy. It's a joy to see people's lives transformed and healed and embracing Christ and all of his fullness. And that's a holistic gospel.
So where would you point our listeners to online with the C&MA so that they can understand more about the Justice and Compassion work of the Alliance, how they might step in and get involved, how they can support by even using the catalog that you mentioned, the Justice and Compassion catalog? Maybe just help us understand that.
Well, the thing about the Compassion Catalog that we've really tried to do is not just make it a guide for giving money. We actually describe the projects. We have a verse of scripture. We have a prayer that goes through each. We wanted to make it a learning guide that people could take the Compassion Catalog and they could read through it and go, oh, we do that? Oh, that's wonderful. And pray about those ministries. We need prayer as much as we need financial support.
Right.
And so, and even as people are reading through that gift catalog, they might go, that kind of ministry interests me. Let me connect with Envision or with Global Ministries. Let me see if I could be a part of that. Right. Because we don't just hire the seminary evangelists anymore. Part of our makeup of Global Ministries is a compassion track that, we have our doctors, our engineers, people with international development degrees, MBAs. I mean, we need all kinds of people with all different backgrounds to serve as part of our teams overseas so that we can have a more holistic approach.
Wow. So there are lots of ways people can get involved.
Sure.
And if they want to learn more, they can go to cmacan.org.
Yeah.
And you can look up under Ministries and you'll see there Justice and Compassion. And then there's also faithhopeandaction.ca. And I'll include a link to the Justice and Compassion catalog on the app as well as in the description there for the podcast episode.
Yes. So the catalog is online. And also at that page, you can also order hard copies if the listener would prefer to have a hard copy.
Yeah.
But the faithhopeandaction.ca is a website that we developed for updates on how the funds in the Justice and Compassion catalog are being used. Stories, beautiful stories of wholeness, of community development, of disaster response. So there's all kinds of refugee sponsorship. We didn't even touch on that here in Canada.
That's huge, yeah.
Christian and Missionary Alliance is a sponsorship agreement holder with the Government of Canada, which means as a national SAW, sponsorship agreement holder, our local churches can sponsor refugees to come to Canada and they can envelop them and help them to resettle in Canada. And again, my experience in refugee camps around the world in various places has just deepened this conviction in me that that we need to be a church that embraces the wanderer, the sojourner, the foreigner who has lost everything. Yeah. And so as through the government's program called the Private Sponsorship of Refugee Program, Canada is one of the only countries that allows you to name the person or family that you want to apply to bring to Canada. Really? And there's a very thorough vetting system. So it does take quite a process for the people to actually arrive. But Yeah, so we went from, after a number of different travels in my visitation of different camps around the world. I came back saying, Franklin, this was still when Franklin was here. We need to become a sponsorship agreement holder. So he approved it, and in February 2012, we actually became older, and we started. Maybe 12 churches were interested, but then that's that time when little Aylin washed up on the shore of Turkey.
Oh, yeah.
The world woke up to the refugee crisis, is particularly the Syrian crisis, and my office started getting phone call after phone call. What are we doing about these refugees? Well, we already had been doing things, and so we just opened up the opportunity to say, here's this beautiful program, you could respond. So we went from helping about 12 churches to over 200 churches within a year, and engaged in somehow in the process, and not only just Alliance churches, mostly Alliance churches were responding, but we also took under 3 other denominations under our umbrella:
Oh, cool.
Evangelical Fellowship of Canada, the Associated Gospel Churches of Canada, and the Fellowship Baptist Churches of Canada.
Wow.
So we're still serving all of those denominations for refugee sponsorship, and it's beautiful to see a church come around a family, and just walk them through the first year, at least, in their settlement of starting a new life here in Canada. So I've personally been through it. My husband and I, they arrived in our home. We have a basement apartment suite. And so right now I am Auntie Joanne to the 2 little girls. We are family. We are their family. And so I said to Lee, my husband, after I came back from particularly the Syrian refugee camp in Jordan and Lebanon, and I said to Lee, if I'm going to ask churches to do this, I want to do this first. And so our little church plant agreed to do it. And so we said, okay, let's as a church do this. And we thought, we'll just trust God for the money, because the church has to raise the money for the first year settlement.
Right.
And so long story short, through a connection of mine, I was connected with this very wealthy couple who wanted to support a sponsorship, but their church didn't want to do it. So a friend of mine connected us, and this wealthy couple said, you are a church plant. We will fund it if you actually do the settlement.
Oh, wow.
So God provided. We stepped out of this young church plant with like 40 adults at the time, and we're like, okay, we'll do this. And then God provided.
Wow.
And this family now, I'll just briefly say, it's been 3 years. They both speak English really well, working full-time, 2 cars, kids in school, wonderful grades, very high grades. And the wife just completed, because her English was just so excellent, a dental assistant program. She's
Really?
So they've just really taken off, settled well.
Yeah.
And I hear stories like that when churches come around and really work with and become family to these newcomers.
We just have a couple families. It's actually a large family that have just arrived here at FAC.
Okay.
As part of our refugee sponsorship.
Yeah, because I should say, First Alliance Church, most listeners may know, is a sponsorship agreement holder as a local church. So the C&MA is a national SAW, and you are a local church SAW. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's beautiful to see these families come in. And again, they're coming to this country, especially now with snow, and they've never seen snow or been a part of cold. And they're like, what have we done? But to hear the response to the love that they've been shown is just so cool. And it really is a blessing for us to be involved in God's work that way.
Yeah. And local churches across Canada, they are living and breathing this. I mean, I love it when I can tell their stories, because they are just really growing in this and being missional in their communities, so that if their church ever closed their doors, the community would go, we can't lose you. Don't leave. That should be every church's vision, that they are so blessing their community and seeking to bring wholeness and well-being to their communities where there is need. Is what I'm seeing more and more of our Alliance churches do that. So it's very encouraging in that.
Cool. Well, I'm so glad you're doing what you're doing, that God's called you, gifted you to lead in this way. And thanks for sharing your heart with us as a church. And God bless you as you continue on in your work.
Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity to share.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.